for that introduction. I also just want to say I'm so grateful for all of you being here today. Many of you from early in my roots, and I'm grateful to be sharing this space together today. So I'm just going to start off with I'm going to start my timer just because I can talk sometimes. So I'm going to take about 5 minutes to introduce myself, a little bit about my spiritual journey and my call to ministry. I saw my youth director is here from my Lutheran roots. That's where I started at First Lutheran. I had a really wonderful experience in the Lutheran Church. Really wonderful youth program, a lot of really incredible camp experiences. I remember some of my early music experiences at camp really shaped who I was and sort of the wonder of God. I also had a couple of Pentecostal friends that brought me sometimes to some praise and worship services, but also really got me into Christian music. In college, I dove a little more deeply into what I would name now as evangelical Christianity, doing a lot of praise and worship music, being a part of bands, leading a number of Bible studies. And then about midway through college, I took more religion courses. Rebecca referenced this, but I learned more about the history of Christianity and a lot of the violence, and really came to this place of kind of pulling the mat out of everything I'd known. A part of that was going to Chicago and doing an urban studies program my junior year of college, when I kind of questioned everything about what I thought I knew. And then it took a while for me to slowly come back to, as Rebecca mentioned, choosing Christianity again, spent some time with the Unitarian Universalist folks, actually UCC for a time too, just a short bit. I was really deeply influenced by the Church of the Savior out in Washington, D.C. That's a really incredible community that especially lifts up inward, outward call, lots of reflection, and what are we called to in the world, deeply grounded in service to the world. And then I also, part of one of the folks on that call here too is a leader of a group called Wilderness Way Community that brought me another step in coming back to Christianity. Wilderness Way Community talks about roots in the wisdom of Christianity and roots in the wisdom of nature. That was really important to me. Spent some time with Quakers too. You can see I made my way around spiritual seeking. Went to Buddhist meditation, 10-day course, and actually did Buddhist meditation for a number of years. And then when my children were born, that became a little less. And then a couple important mentors for me, Ched Myers and Elaine Enns, a couple of theologians out in California, really opened up really ecumenical work, justice work, network throughout the United States. They also have done a lot of work on relationship between white Christian settlers and indigenous folks, and that has really deeply shaped me as well. Let's see, I'm just looking at my notes here. Yeah, all of those are kind of the main influences in my life spiritually, and they all have really deeply shaped me. And I really do feel like I found a really good home in the UCC because there's so much space theologically, so much diversity, and I feel like I can bring my full self into that space. I started at Peace Church almost 8 years ago now as the youth and children and youth minister, and then the year after into the faith formation role that Rebecca mentioned, being licensed back in 2015. And after I was licensed, as Rebecca referenced to, I continued on my discernment process. It was actually the moment that I first discerned yes to that was at a Center for Courage and Renewal retreat. Some of you might know the Center for Courage and Renewal started or often associated with Parker Palmer, who's also been an important author and teacher to me. Let's see. Couple other things I'll mention. I, all of what I described in my spiritual journey, I feel like has really kind of prepared me and brought me to this place of really feeling a call to ordination. I remember one of my discernment committee members sort of saying, "How would you feel if you stopped this process, if you weren't ordained?" And I thought about it for a bit, and I thought to myself, I think I could have a meaningful life if I didn't do that. But there's so much in my life leading to that it would feel like such a waste of call, right? That there's so many pieces that fit. And I really feel that resonance, and I've really felt that grown, especially over the last year or two as I've studied more deeply, feeling like, yes, I really feel called to deepen in leadership in the church, and being connected to where God is still speaking and asking those questions, and being committed to a church that continues to grow in love. Let's see. Yeah, I think maybe I'll just mention constructive theology was really important to me. That was the space where I really, I think it was Charlotte maybe that articulated this of, in the past it was like, I could name a number of theologians that I loved, but in constructive theology, I synthesized all of them and then said, this is my theology. Right, really kind of named how it showed up in me, and it sort of became something new in that space. I was so grateful for that class. And then CPE was just one of my most important experiences in life, learning really to dive into lots of uncomfortable places, learning it's okay for me to feel angry. And in fact, what does anger have to say to me? Can I sit down for coffee with my anger today and say, what are you saying to me? And really practicing welcoming in emotions, even if they're hard, and also as a point of connection to people, rather than sort of saying, I can rise above my anger. There might be a space and time for that, but I think a path that really taught me a lot was, what if I acknowledge my anger and then use it as Sue says, as a ticket to humanity to say, can you relate? Do you get angry sometimes? Do you get anxious sometimes? Let's be together, right? We don't have to judge, and maybe we don't even have to improve. We can just accept ourselves as we are. Of course, we can have conversations about how we're in relationship. That's always very important. But there's something, I think, a good wisdom in accepting ourselves just as we are. Speaking of Lutheran roots, right? Grace for who we are and acceptance of how we are. I think the only other thing I'll mention in this section is just my last 8 years here at Peace really have helped me see how my gifts can be used in ministry, and really feel a resonance in that, another piece of my call to ministry. So I'll stop on that first piece, and I'll shift now. I've got 4 different questions that I want to sort of spend about 5 minutes on each of those. So the first, just to give you a picture of sort of snapshots of, here's who I am, here's my theology, here's how I relate to ministry. The first one, name a theologian, or I'm going to add theologians because it's hard to pick just one, that has influenced my thinking, with at least one important idea from a theologian, and how that plays out, how that idea is a part of my ministry. So there are 3 people I thought of. One is Stephen Charleston, who's an indigenous Christian elder, and he has become a pretty important person to me. I read one of his books each day. But he's got a book called The 4 Vision Quests of Jesus. And in it, he talks about how Jesus rejects individualism. And a big part of how we see Jesus, and even the idea of Jesus as a savior, is someone who leads us in rejecting individualism. And instead moving toward relationship as a whole. So this idea, and he lifts up kind of Andrew Jackson as the epitome of rugged individualism that sort of breaks connection with everyone else, right? And he's speaking, of course, from a place of his own people in relationship to Andrew Jackson. But he really lifts up Jesus in the wilderness as giving examples of how Jesus continues to say, nope, not individualism. It's not about me, the trap of the self, but it's about the whole. It's about my commitment to the community and the healing of the whole. So for me, often how that plays out in ministry is really just compassion, both for myself and for other people. When we get into places where we're stuck, we get into trauma, we get into anger, and we hurt other people. Seeing that as a time when we get pulled into the trap of the self. And I mean, those are layered conversations, of course. It's not just about being selfish. There's a lot more, especially when trauma is involved. But I think the way that I relate to that is always seeing a person in context and in relationship to the whole. That when we can build relationships of trust, we can help each other get to the place where actually we're all seeing our best possibilities. And the healing is about the wholeness of relationship and about our collective wholeness. Ruby Sales is another person that's been really important to me, civil rights activist and theologian. I went out a number of years ago to Washington, D.C. She invited 20 white men to come and reflect on a theology of redemption for white men in this time. And it was also a very deeply shaping experience for me. Listening to her talk about Black folk religion, talk about really having compassion, hearing her talk about the terror and trauma that she experiences from white men in particular, but also still believing in our best possibilities. That language really rang for me, this idea of what are our best possibilities? And just to have someone say, I believe in you, was really deeply influential for me. She also talked, actually connecting to Stephen Charleston, she talked about harmonizing the I with the we and the we with the I, right? This idea of as we learn together, it is about right relationship. It's about connecting. It's about how we move forward together. And I felt, even as I've explored my own gender as Rebecca sort of subtly referred to as she introduced me, I really do still feel a calling to work with white men because there's a piece of me that feels my own liberation is bound up in that and our collective liberation is bound up in that in a way that goes beyond just simple identity, beyond white men in many ways, because then we can all have conversations about what does healing and wholeness look like. Then, last, Sally McFaig. The Body of God. She's got a book, an incredible book called The Body of God. And this really kind of brought Ruby Sales and Stephen Charleston and all my experiences into kind of almost this cosmic space, right? So she has this idea that, when we talk about theology, we're talking about metaphor, right? There's so much that we maybe can't know, but we speak anyway, and we theologize anyway because here we are together, and we're trying to learn about love and life and how to be together, and ideas about who or what is God. And so she talks about the metaphor of the universe as the body of God, and this she names then when we think about God in that way, all of a sudden, everything becomes incarnational theology. Everything becomes a process, so process theology, a process of becoming. When we look around, everything is holy. And it of course, we also learn then from Jesus that when we look at the universe as the body of God, when everything around us is connected, it's all about right relationship then as well. And Jesus gives us an example of when we love the most vulnerable among us, we help heal the whole. So we start with the most vulnerable, and in doing that, we bring in together the healing of the whole. So for me, again, you notice a theme. It's all relational. And for me, theology is very centered in moving from whatever broken relationships we might have into either back to or toward becoming into right relationship. And there's a lot in what does that mean? But that's sort of the that's the framework that often for me comes most alive when I think about God, when I think about Spirit moving, is Spirit is moving us toward right relationship again. What's the next moment? What is my best possibility? What are the best possibilities of others? And how are those connected? So that's what I'll share about theologians. Okay, I'm doing okay, I think, on time. The next one is choose a scripture passage or story and list and describe 5 sermon themes that might be described from it. And in my paper, I wrote a fair bit about Jacob wrestling the angel. And I love this story. And I realized as I was sort of thinking about what are the themes, like sermon themes that I could draw out, there are so many. It's such a rich story because here you have Jacob, who is coming with his family back close to and really confronting not only his brother Esau, but the history of Jacob stealing Esau's birthright. And so he's coming back. If my memory serves me right, he's kind of sending his family members first, so to kind of buffer, right? Of like, hey, maybe it's okay, you go first, right? So he's really avoiding so much. And he comes to a river, and it's in the middle of the night. And an angel or a stranger comes, and he wrestles this angel, and they wrestle until daybreak. And Jacob's hip socket is dislocated, but he won't let go. And the angel says, "Let go of me." And he says, "No, I won't let go until you give me a blessing." And so the angel blesses him, and he gives him a new name, Israel. Right? I love this story. There's so much that I resonate with of like wrestling with God. Yes, my story. What is this Christianity? So what do I believe? Can I deal with all the stuff and the violence and everything in there? How do I relate to it? So sermon themes. I've already named some of them, but let me just kind of pull them together here for a minute. I ran these by my partner, and she said, "They're all questions, Nathan." And I said, "Yeah, I guess that's kind of how I think about sermons, is I need a question that drives me. If I have something to say, I need the question first." So the first one that I'm thinking of is, what does it mean to confront what you've been running from? Of course, this idea of Jacob running from his past. What does it mean for Jacob to be honest, to really go deep and be honest about what we've done and how we want to engage that? So that's one sermon. Another I thought of was, what does it mean to take on a new identity or a new name? And I immediately thought of so many of my queer friends who take on new names, new identities through, of course, oftentimes trauma and pain. Boy, there's a lot of richness in that idea of coming to a new name, becoming something new, becoming something we've always been. And I think there could be a really beautiful sermon about that. Third one, what does it mean to wrestle with God? Boy, I feel like I have a lot I could say about that of what do I do with this? This just keeps coming back. And I can't get rid of it. I've tried to run from it, but okay, here I am. Let me wrestle with the hard texts and the part, substitutionary atonement. I've always wrestled with that, of like this idea of Jesus dying for my sins for a wrathful God. I know there's a lot of like ways you could talk about that in a different way, but like that doesn't sit well with me, but I still sometimes wrestle with, are there ways to look at that and the wisdom of that? And other pieces, even the cross, like how is the cross about healing? But, Pastor Bud preaching about that, right? Like that's wrestling, I think, with God. Number 4, how is pain a part of becoming who we are? Boy, there's a lot of subtlety that would have to be acknowledged, right? Like not lifting up suffering as, at least from my perspective, I don't want to lift up suffering as a good thing, as something that should be like done like, oh, this, like we are called to suffer. Some folks might disagree with me on that, but for me, there's some important reframing around how do we acknowledge the pain that we have, and that is a part of our story. How do we integrate that into our life, and how do I love the idea of light in the cracks, right? How can light, or how can life come out of our pain, even when sometimes all we have to say to pain is just, I don't know what to do with you. And the last one, what is a blessing? What is a blessing? Sarah asked me this. She said, I'm going to ecclesiastical counsel you, Nathan. What is a blessing? Oh, okay. I think a blessing is, it's about relationship. Blessing might come from God. A blessing might come from another person. And it's a naming of, it's a prayer. It's a prayer for goodness, for life. And I think there could be a lot in that for a sermon. Okay, next one. Third question on the list. Let's see. Oh, I want to geek out on UCC polity for a minute here. Describe the mutual obligations and accountability expected among local church clergy, conference or association, staff members, and national setting staff and members and bodies. A lot in there. I love UCC polity. I also happen to love process. Some folks will know that about me. Of like, all right, Nathan, we've had enough process. Can we move forward already? But we're a pretty process heavy church, right? So we have local congregations, power in the local. We're at ecclesiastical council today, and that's about local church authority. But we also have relationship to other settings, like the conference or associations. In Minnesota, it's just the conference. So pastors are accountable not only to each other, but to the conference. Human relationships, as we all know, can get messy. And so having relationships where we can check in with each other, where we can call out, hey, I think this is happening and it's not healthy, or we need to work on this together, those are very important. So there's some accountability around how we do that. And between congregation and conference. So when the annual conference happens, our annual meeting happens at conference, we all come together. Churches may speak prophetically and bring a resolution to say, here's what we think the conference should be about, and we should pass a conference resolution. And the conference may say, cool, let's do it, and we'll vote on it, and then it'll get passed back to congregations to say, this isn't necessarily binding because you have local authority, but we believe that we feel called as a body to do this. So we would like you to be in relationship and accountable to these new resolutions. The same is true of the national setting. So I'm actually planning to go to the national gathering this summer, and there may be lots happening at the national setting. There may be workshops or things that the national setting is offering, conferences and offering congregations. But again, folks can go as delegates or even just as folks, visiting folks to see what's happening and to participate in the life of the national synod. So we could be a national leader on something, and that's all decided at that national setting. It's not representative of any particular church. It's a whole new body that comes together and is accountable to itself, and then accountable in relationship, in covenant. That's a big word in the UCC. Covenant, being in relationship over time and committing to each other. Let's see. Oh, I wanted to mention, too, another way that the conference and clergy are in an accountability relationship is that clergy have to go through boundaries training every 2 years, I believe, and in addition to that, anti-racism training. And that's sort of setting up expectations of clergy, and clergy saying, yes, we think this is important, and we commit to that, too. We're committing to what the conference is expecting of us. And I think the only other thing I wanted to mention on sort of UCC polity is that it really is grounded, even though, again, human relationship can be messy. It's grounded in a commitment to each other over time, to disagree, to say, maybe even I need some space because this is bringing up a lot of stuff, but I'm going to come back and try to engage again to the best of my ability to see if we can come up with something that really lifts up the wisdom of the whole and we move together. So that's what I'll say about relationships between settings and geek out on polity. Last thing, name and describe ways in which pastoral care can occur in the context of worship. I love this question, and I think my answer is all the ways, right? There's like pretty much every part of a worship service could be pastoral care. Certainly songs. I love music, and many folks do. Many folks come to church and are fed by songs. Songs often have the power to name something that might be happening in a person's life. That maybe someone's going through a time when they feel really alone, and a song can articulate on a deeper level that you are not alone. We are here. We're together. Let's see. Other ways. Of course, prayer. Prayer can be a space where we lift up, every Sunday we lift up joys and concerns. And this is really a space where we share with each other what we need pastorally. Sometimes there are ways that lay leaders connect with each other and offer care. And sometimes it's a place for clergy to come and say, okay, I now know this is happening in a person's life and I can have a follow-up conversation with them. That's another space, I think, that right after worship that I would still consider part of worship is connecting with folks. And sometimes people just need a listening ear, and that is good pastoral care. I've been a part of healing services where folks are invited to come up and say what they need prayer for, and then to be able to pray for individual people. And that can be really powerful. That can be just a really a depth of connection. And often I feel like whatever words are coming out of me, I'm just, I'm trying to do my best to speak how Spirit is moving and trust that whatever I say, there's something in it that might be providing pastoral care for someone. Let's see, anything else that I'm missing there? Yeah, I think sermons are, I think an obvious one. Sermons are a space to tell stories, to open people up, to talk about depression, to talk about addiction and how that can come up in people's lives, to talk about what do we do when we get a medical diagnosis, or what do we do when we're waiting for a medical diagnosis? Those, depending on the sermon, those can be spaces where we can either provide a kind of a pastoral framing that might help someone go from a place of despair to, okay, maybe there's a thread of hope here I can pull on, or maybe it is also a space to just say, it's okay to be where I am, and I'm hearing Spirit moving in the words that are being preached today, that I'm inspired by, that I feel a sense of peace about. So I think that is my presentation. I realized I had a song I wanted to sing, and I don't know if I'm like way over my time or if I can sing a song that just a very short one that pulls together some of the threads. Is that okay, John, if I do that?
Please.
Okay. I got a whole bunch of songs that I thought I could share, but a song came to me this morning, and I haven't shared it with anyone except for my spouse, and I have to remember how it goes. But I thought it really kind of captured some of the theology, the theologians I talked about. And the words are, help me to remember to love, so I don't get stuck just in me. I know I can learn to see what you can be in your possibility. So I'll sing it here and we'll see how it goes. Help me to remember. Help me to remember to love. Help me to remember. Help me to remember to love. So why don't you get stuck in just me? I know I can learn how to see what you can be in your possibility. So, maybe so. Thank you all.